Thucydides' narrative and the long-term history he predicted are punctuated with the heroism, martyrdom, and so-called collateral damage of good people in bad circumstances. So to judge the pessimism or realism of Thucydides' view of human condition, we have to understand him first in his own context. Thucydides was a first or second-hand witness to nearly 3 decades of carnage. He was also a very well-educated man who tells us that he studied as best he could the history of wars up to his own time. From all of the sources available to him, he knew of no significant period in which the Greeks were not at war with one another or with other peoples. And still, he judged the Peloponnesian War to be the worst in length and brutality. Secondly, we have to judge Thucydides' prediction of future warfare in the light of subsequent history. For when he writes, "My work is not a showpiece for a temporary audience, but a possession for all time," he is at the outset forecasting for his readers what his history shows and his theory asserts, that the history of the Peloponnesian War is a paradigm for much of the indefinite history of humanity. Were Thucydides here today, he would certainly recognize the marvelous accomplishments of mankind in technology, science, and art. But he chose the more volatile subject of war and the politics that drives it. But Thucydides, looking into our past 24 centuries, could fairly say that his prediction about repeated wars had been correct, and he would be no more sanguine about our future than he was about his own. Since history has proved Thucydides right that the individual and collective natures of people are such that they cannot and will not always control circumstances or react to them for their own peace or that of their fellows, permanent and ubiquitous peace is an ideal beyond human reach. Thucydides' response to the optimism of President Woodrow Wilson is that the only war to end all wars is the one that extinguishes humanity, a feat that technology has finally made possible in our age. In the end, the point is probably not what we call Thucydides, realist or pessimist. It is whether his history is, to use his word, useful. To be so, it must be read and its lessons learned. The lessons are often hard to learn, let alone put into action. The ancient biographer Marcellinus claimed that Thucydides wrote obscurely so that the common people would not understand him. And similarly, Hobbes allowed that some people cannot penetrate the nature of Thucydides' thought. But the rest of humanity, that probably includes all of you, ignores this thought to the peril of all. Those who won't learn Thucydides because he bores them may well be bored to death and take others with them. There is, however, some optimism in the other side of the Thucydidean equation, that the usefulness of learning and applying his lessons can lead at times to the betterment of human circumstances. And it is a fair inference from his theory and his historical narrative that the chances of peace will be proportionate to the effort of individuals and groups to maintain and improve good social, economic, and political conditions. We don't need the rhetorical question. If Thucydides were here today, what would he tell us? He is here. He's been telling us for some 2,400 years, but the history of those years suggests that more people could have been listening. But an attentive reader of Thucydides could summarize some of his lessons for tipping the balance toward peace. Be an educated citizenry, not like the Athenian assembly who often acted stupidly, rashly, and gullibly. Beware when demagogues and their followers start to manipulate language, using good words for bad things and bad words for good things. Elect and listen to smart leaders like Pericles, but minus his imperialism. Heed Dialectus on fostering economic and social conditions conducive to good order. Defeat political demagogues like Cleon, who are all about themselves instead of the common weal, and who view sensible peacemaking as a show of weakness. Be peacemakers like Nicias, but unlike him, don't be dutiful in policies you know are wrong. Listen to Nicias' advice not to promote officers like Alcibiades, whose military skills are less at the service of their country than their own advancement, and who see peace as the frustration of a career. Avoid wars that do not have an achievable end that is worth the human, political, and economic cost. I will end this by going back to the fall of 1969, where this lecture really began. The student activist then used to say to us, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Thucydides was not much given to cliches, but I do think he would subscribe to the idea behind that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for a fabulously interesting lecture, bringing to life all these characters. And Thucydides might have been a very instructive storyteller, but he had good material to write about.
Yes, he
And
did.
all these people with their weaknesses and their virtues provided good stuff for storytelling. I'm sure you want to take some
I'd be happy
Some
to
questions?
field questions.
When you described Thucydides' view of human nature, it sounded like Thucydides is known for classic realism, but your description of circumstance. Sorry. When you described Thucydides' view of human nature, it sounded like that I was known for classic realism, but your description of circumstances, the potential for change or the betterment of circumstances, sounded more like liberalism, in the sense of not the realist idea of perpetual war or human nature remains standard.
Well,
I'm not sure I like. I'm trying to get it.
No, I think you're right that if you take either of these views to extreme, if you say we are not, that our destiny is completely out of our control, I mean, you get into the kind of argument about the orphan criminal whose defender pleads that he should be exonerated on the grounds that he lacked proper parenting. No, I don't think the idea that circumstances are in varying degrees within our control necessarily says anything about conservatism or realism. I mean, it could, but I'm sure Thucydides would not think so. At least Hobbes, who is considered one of the most dour of political philosophers, found Thucydides his closest soulmate. Well, I didn't answer your question very well.
It wasn't a very
I'll
great
think
question.
about it for another 40 years. Others? Well, thank you for such a big and attentive audience. Have a good summer.